All right. Hello, everybody. I'm Major Geisler with the Medical Recruiting Brigade. I'm the Recruiting Integration Officer, so I'm the physician that represents the medical corps on the recruiting side and represents the recruiting side on the medical corps lanes. We have our guest speaker, Colonel Doug Maurer, who's the Deputy Director of the Army GME. We're going to give a pretty good presentation that covers kind of all aspects. And I'm gonna go first, and give me a second while I share my screen. And can you see my screen? Awesome.
Yes.
I did a whole presentation this week for 30 minutes, and then they asked me if I had slides. So it was quite embarrassing. So again, I'm Major Britt Geisler, and we're going to kind of try to achieve some objectives of an intro to Army medicine, what Army medicine really is, some of the programs we understand, and some of the processes. So we'll go through the outline real quick before we get to Colonel Maurer's presentation. The Surgeon General, Lieutenant General Scott Dingle, has our mission and our vision, as well as our priorities. And they're they're a little bit of in Army speak. The current fight is about the readiness and health
I'm in it now.
and our healthcare delivery, as well as force development. But I think one of the biggest thing is taking care of our soldiers, civilians, and families always. So this is kind of what the Army medicine revolves around, our mission and vision. We've definitely had a long history in Army medicine, from the first apothecary general in the Revolutionary War. You see in the Civil War and the World Wars, our long and our historic past. On the left, you have MASH in Vietnam, and on the right, you have our aid station in Afghanistan. So and everything in between. And as we go on to the future, this is Colonel, I'm just blanking on his name. Oh, he's an Army colonel that just came back from the International Space Station a couple months ago. So when we look to the past, we see our present, and we look to the future of Army medicine. There is a wide variety of things that you can be and achieve, to include being an astronaut. A little bit about me, a little breakdown. I've been doing this job since July of 19. I'm originally from
Hey, Brett, that was Andy Morgan.
That's it. Colonel Morgan. Yes. Thank you, sir. I had it like probably half an hour ago, and it just left my brain. I'm from a small town in Pennsylvania. I'm married with a very boisterous 4-year-old. You might be hearing his footsteps upstairs. I'm an OBGYN by trade. I've done a lot of small rural medicine. I'm ROTC and Uniform Services University graduate. And then I did my residency, 4-year residency down in San Antonio. I've been in small places: Fort Polk, Louisiana, Fort Wainwright, Alaska. I deployed as a squadron surgeon, and my world revolves around my family, my Peloton, and taking care of my 10 chickens that are in my backyard in Fort Knox, Kentucky right now. So when you think of Army medicine, a lot of people think, explosions and deployments. This is me, but don't worry. It's just a very dramatic picture. It was actually the EOD doing practice explosions in the background, and a documentary team caught this. I was in no harm here at all, but a lot of people think that this is what we do on the daily. But really what we do is do absolutely amazing medicine, surrounded by amazing people, for amazing people. I know there's lots of amazings in there, but this is me in the OR with one of my mentors that's still serving to this day, doing state-of-the-art care for our service members and their beneficiaries, and really becoming a family. I was in a small aid station when I was in Afghanistan, and I still talk to about 75% of these people, watching them grow and watching their lives change, and we're still active on social media, and you really get to know and love your people to your right and your left. And then taking care of your friends and your family. This is my son's first birthday, and I'm surrounded by people I work with, people who've taken care of my son. My son's pediatrician, um, midwife, nurses, everything that we've been friends with for even to this day. And then we have lifelong friendships. In the front row, there is me in 2002 in BDUs and ROTC. And on the right is two of the same girls talking to one of our buddies, Vance Trinkle. 20 years later, we're still friends and see each other as much as possible. And that's kind of the bond that we share. The horrible FaceTime picture of Vance Trinkle, I deployed with him, and 14 years later, after meeting him in ROTC, we're in Afghanistan together. So you're never far from family, and you're never far from friends, because the people around you become family. And then there are places that I probably would have never seen, lived, or experienced if it hadn't been for the adventures that the military put me on. And this is just kind of a collection of being at Banff in Canada, and of course petting a reindeer. Who would ever thought they'd do that with their kid? And Glacier National Park, Mammoth, driving the Alaska Highway pregnant, and then with a 2-year-old, and being in Hawaii. If you notice the Buddhist temple behind us, about exactly a year apart. So we have lots of programs and different steps of your life, your medical career, that you can enter the Army. And really, this is not the talk to get really in the depths of the rules and regulations, and because if you want to talk that, we could definitely contact me or a recruiter, and we can get into the deep dives of every single program. But if you're an undergraduate and you don't think HPSP is the exact right thing for you, you have opportunities in residency and then afterwards. And we also do take care of beneficiaries all around the world. These are our medical treatment facilities, so there are hospitals, and you have the opportunity to care and have the adventure. I don't think it doesn't have Korea, so there is some in Korea as well. So adventure awaits. So the HPSP process, really, it's a little bit different than applying to Uniformed Services University, because that is through AMCAS. To apply for the HPSP scholarship, the Health Professional Scholarship Program, is really through an AMED recruiter. Some of the baseline requirements is you must be a U.S. citizen, and the minimum application criteria is listed below. There are waivers for the minimum application criteria, but that is just another step in the process. But we try to keep it with the GPA and the MCAT score. And you must be applying to or accepted to a U.S. accredited program. And how to contact us. We do have a really cool app. It's called U.S. Army Medicine Careers. It's on the Apple and the Android, where you can kind of read about all of our different careers in the Army. And then there's a contact us or find a recruiting office, and you can find the closest recruiting office to you. I sometimes find, especially when I'm talking to people from all over the country, this is a little bit sometimes the easiest way to contact your local AMED recruiter. And you can always contact me. I know it's dangerous on the internet these days to throw my email out, but I try to be as available for you as possible for anyone that's interested, because I love talking about the Army. I love talking about my Army career, and the options are just very plentiful and too much to actually get into in just an hour. So if you talk to me on the phone, it'll probably be a little bit more than an hour. So just expect that, because the opportunities are vast. And really I just wanted to give a quick intro about what my Army story is, and what a lot of the misconceptions of the Army are. And then it's going to, we're going to hand it off to Colonel Maurer, and so he can talk about what you guys are really here for, and that is, after you get into medical school, what's next? So, sir?
Thanks, Britt. Thank you. And Britt's going to control the slides here for me. So again, I'm Colonel Doug Maurer, and we'll hop on in. Next slide. So this is me. You can see my background. I was undergrad ROTC at Notre Dame, did my medical school at Ohio University on an HPSP scholarship, internship and residency in family medicine at Tripler. After that, went to Fort Hood, spent a good chunk of my career there at Hood, running a clinic there, then being involved in the residency program as the medical student coordinator. First deployment to Afghanistan at that time as an emergency medicine physician, even on family medicine, but worked as an ER doc at a combat hospital in Bagram, Afghanistan, which was a very busy emergency room during the war. After that, did a FACDev fellowship, got a master's of public health at University of Washington, went back to Fort Hood, this time as the family medicine residency director, deployed again, back to Afghanistan, went back to MAD again, this time as the fellowship director, then went to Fort Sill as the deputy commander of the clinic there, and currently deputy director at Falls Church. And I'll be going back to MAD again here in the spring as the director of medical education there. So that's short and sweet, kind of my career. Happy to talk more about it after that, but bounced around a bit, but mostly, as you can see, in medical education, pretty much my entire career. Next slide. So again, I currently work at Falls Church at the Office of the Surgeon General and the Medical Education Directorate. This is kind of what we cover, I call cradle to the grave of medical education. So our office oversees anyone on a ROTC educational delay, anybody on an HPSP scholarship, and indirectly we work with the USU students from a GME standpoint, getting them ready for our military match. And then again, our office oversees all the residencies and fellowships, or GME, if you will, that the Army has. We run the board that selects folks for residencies and fellowships, and oversee indirectly the directors of medical education and the program directors at all of our military treatment facilities around the US. We also do continuing medical education. One of my roles is the Army CME director for all the CME hours that we offer throughout the Army. We do some other things there, as you see as well. Next slide. So a little bit on HPSP. Certainly Britt and the team at USAREC and Steve and the other recruiters who are on the call are really the experts on this. By the time they kind of come to me, so to speak, you're already in the program and all this stuff is happening. But as you can see, it's a pretty sweet deal. In fact, it's a much better deal now for you all than it was when I was HPSP. Yes, back then we still had tuition and fees paid for, but the stipend, let's just say, was quite a bit lower than that. So you get that. You get a nice sign-on bonus, which is great. We pay for pretty much everything. There are some things we don't pay for that will come up. But for the most part, if it's on your school as being required, we will pay for it. You also get some active duty pay each year, which is even nicer in addition to your stipend. Britt's kind of already hit those requirements, but you have to, and I'll just foot stomp the accredited U.S. medical school. So again, it cannot be a Caribbean medical school. Puerto Rico, though, does count, but not a otherwise Caribbean medical school. You have to maintain a full-time status. So if you are taking time off from school during medical school, you lose your benefits. Some students do that. They'll take a leave of absence. We'll approve a leave of absence up to a year, but usually not more than that. And there are minimum requirements to get a scholarship. There is a waiver process, but there's no guarantee that we will approve that waiver. But those are the minimum requirements, at least for the scholarship. Next slide. So again, we have had really banner years now for the last 5 or 6 years for the program. And this coming year, we're filling all our scholarships again. So the program is full. The students are very high quality. As you can see, they're well above the minimum criteria. And that new MCAT, even I was kind of getting used to that. It's certainly not the way we scored the MCAT back in my days, but the students are doing very well on that new test. And because of that, you're going to pass your boards. So the vast majority of people will pass all of their board exams, USMLE or COMLEX. We don't care which one you take, but if you're at a DO school, you have to take the COMLEX, but you are not required to take the USMLE if you are an osteopathic student. But you do have to pass your exams before you can start GME. We're waiving the requirement for the skills exams just because those aren't even being held, at least from an allopathic standpoint, until July of this year because of COVID. So we'll make exceptions here or there, but for the most part, we do have some kind of hurdles you have to get through and maintain in order to come into GME after medical school. Next slide. So why do we want you to do military medicine? So I saw there was a question that came up before the call about this a little bit, military versus civilian. So one reason that the Army in particular trains folks in military residencies, with very few exceptions, is because we want those three things you see right there: an expert clinician, military scope of practice, and military acculturation. So why is that important? Well, expert clinician, as I've said already, and we'll say here again shortly, our programs train expert clinicians. We have a very, very high board take rate and very, very high board pass rate, much higher than civilian residencies on average. So our programs will produce an expert clinician. Furthermore, our military programs are focused on a military scope of practice. All of the programs, even down to pathology or other non-direct patient care specialties, radiology, et cetera, all will do some level of trauma care during residency. Some will do obviously a lot more. So one example we like to use is for general surgery. Burn rotations, for example, are not required as part of a civilian general surgery residency. But as you can imagine, burns are very much unfortunately, a part of military medicine. And so we require all of our general surgeons in our programs to do burn rotations. And I'll just say in my own specialty of family medicine, there is a lot that we do in military family medicine that the civilian programs do not touch, from procedure numbers to OB numbers to trauma care, et cetera. That's something that only you're going to get in a military program. And then obviously, if you're in a military program, you're going to get the military acculturation that you won't get by doing a civilian residency. And you can see some of the examples there. Essentially, you're on active duty in a military uniform in a military residency for at least 1 year if you do a transitional year, but typically at least 3 years for your primary care specialties and upwards of 6 years for your surgical specialties. So you will get acculturated into the military. And that's an issue that we're worried about if we were to train more folks in the civilian side, even though, frankly, we'll maybe talk about this later, there's no room in the civilian match for our trainees. Next slide. So again, we're big, right? And this is why there's no room for us in the civilian side. Just in the Army alone, we have 1,558 people right now in a training status. Basically, a third of the medical corps is in GME at any given time. You put the three services together and you're looking at nearly 3,500 physicians in graduate medical education. Last year, there were 2,000 allopathic physicians that did not match in the civilian match. So if you dumped 3,500 of us into that match, we would literally break the civilian GME system. And that's why the president of the ACGME, the group that accredits all military and civilian residencies, has said, please do not send a bunch of your trainees into our system. Keep your system. It's a great system and it works. So you can see there, we've got 101 Army-sponsored training programs, blah, blah, blah. We cover all the specialties, 74 residencies, 73 fellowships, and they're all accredited and doing just fine, thank you very much, by the standards of the ACGME with a very high first-time board pass rate. Next slide. So where are they at? I updated this for those who've seen this talk before. because as you may have heard, we've added some new residencies. Last year, psychiatry at Fort Hood, and this coming year, general surgery and internal medicine at Womack at Fort Bragg. So those are some additions to our total numbers. So we're growing GME to some degree here at the moment. Next slide. And just to show you where those are on the map. So again, the all green is the Army, all blue is the Navy, the kind of reddish orange color is the Air Force, and then the 2 yellow programs are joint training platforms at San Antonio at Brooke Army Medical Center, or Shawshank, and Walter Reed in Bethesda, Maryland. So there you will see a mix of Army, Navy, and Air Force training side by side. Next slide. So these just kind of show you our fellowship programs. Again, this is an area where we do a fair amount of civilian training because we don't really need the military acculturation when it comes to fellowships. You've already gotten that through your residency. So we're much more willing to send folks out for civilian fellowships, which gives you an even larger number to choose from. But as you can see, we still have a lot of fellowships between the 3 services, and similar to the residencies, the majority of them are either in San Antonio or Walter Reed, but there are a smattering at the other larger centers, Madigan, San Diego, etc. Next slide. Okay, so what residency programs do we offer? These are the ones we currently offer. The Army at the moment has no plans to reduce this number. There is emphasis, I will say, on critical wartime specialties, which we'll talk about here in a moment. The only specialty we have eliminated in the last 2 years is radiation oncology. We still technically have a residency for that, and the final residents are going through that, but we do not plan to train radiation oncology through the military anytime further. But everything else we are doing and will continue to do. Next slide. So what are these critical wartime specialties? We call these bucket 1. These are folks that have something on paper that says if they are part of a unit that would deploy downrange, and these are the types of providers that would go. Some of these, as you can see, are not residencies. I'm not sure why that slide is showing the way it is, Britt. It looks kind of funny. But for example, pulmonary critical care is not a residency. It's a fellowship after doing internal medicine. But obviously we need palm critical care docs at our combat support hospitals. And so you'll see, those are the folks that we say that we want to have downrange. And therefore the Army will definitely put emphasis on making these every year. Next slide. So I've kind of foot stomped and shouted from the rafters that we do all of our training in the military at our facilities, but that's not entirely true. And the reason that we have these exceptions is we need more, particularly emergency medicine, general surgery, and orthopedics than our own programs can make. So we have some civilian partnerships for training. So for example, in emergency medicine, we have 6 or more slots available to us every year at the Medical College of Georgia in Augusta. Those folks, when they go through the match, they can list our 3 emergency medicine programs we have in the Army and list Medical College of Georgia as an option, as well as a civilian option. We might still even send a couple folks into the civilian match for emergency medicine. Same thing with general surgery. We've got our 6 military programs, but we have these 4. 2 of them are new this year, Penn State Hershey and the University of Alabama, where we will place at least 1 military trainee there at Texas, Oregon Health Sciences, Penn State Hershey, Alabama for general surgery, in addition to our military programs. Honestly, this still doesn't make enough general surgeons for us. We have at least 6 additional partnerships that are going through various states of approval. So this may continue to grow. Note that I mentioned we need more orthopedic surgeons, but for the moment, we have yet to establish a civilian partnership for ortho. And that's because there's only 755 orthopedic surgery slots in the entire United States. And it is very hard to get any program to expand, particularly to expand to just give us a spot. But there is some interest, and so we're working that. You can see some options also for neurosurgery and urology, Those we don't necessarily use every year, but we have the option if we need to. Next slide. Okay, so let's talk about the match a little bit, because that's what gets everybody it's kind of a opaque black box that we need to talk about a little bit. So who has to apply for a military residency? So if you have a military obligation, you have to apply. So HPSP, USU students, ROTC Ed Delay, and I'm part of that process. I was just at the ROTC Ed Delay board, and I selected those students that receive that Ed Delay. And I was a beneficiary of that, so I'm honored to do that. But those folks, even though they may not do ROTC with HPSP like I did, they may just be ROTC Ed Delay, go to a civilian medical school, they still have to apply to our military match when they're graduating medical school. Every July, usually on the 1st of July, we release the instructions. So I always tell folks, if you have questions, please read the instructions, and I can send those to anybody that's interested. They do change a little bit every year, but for the most part, they're generally the same. And they're kind of a step-by-step, this is what you do to apply to the match. To increase your chances of getting the residency that you want, we encourage students that, for example, have an HPSP scholarship or USU to do rotations at the places they are most interested in and the specialties they're most interested in. For HPSP, you get 1 active duty for training each fiscal year. We usually allow for an extra one during the 4th year. So you can get those 2-ish rotations. Students many times will also do unfunded rotations where they'll just go rotate if their school will let them at a military site to get in maybe a 3rd, even a 4th rotation. And that way this program directors and the programs know the students and the students know the programs. Each group then makes a list. The students rank their programs. The program directors rank the students. It goes into a computer and voila, it does a match. The formula is guarded like the secret formula for Coca-Cola, but it's very similar to the formula we use for the National Residency Matching Program. Typically, the match happens the end of November and the results come out in the middle of December. However, due to COVID, kind of messing up our planet, as you all have seen, including for those medical students on the call, shutting down rotations even for several months, we pushed everything back a couple weeks. So the board this year won't meet until the end of the 1st week of December, and the results will come out on January 6th. So things are pushed back a little bit. For folks who do not match into the specialty or location of their choice, they can do what's called a rebuttal board or scramble. That also happens in January to potentially change things. But for the most part, 85% will match into their first choice of specialty, 70% into their location of choice. You can see the most competitive ones there at the bottom. Not too different from what you see on the civilian side, but maybe a little different. Next slide. This just is another way of explaining what I kind of just talked about, of kind of the career flow chart from 4th year into your 1st year of medical education. Most of our residencies do not require you to reapply. So for example, if you're family medicine like me or OB like Britt, assuming you successfully complete your 1st year, you roll right into your next year. Only a handful of specialties such as radiology, dermatology, ophthalmology, physical medicine, rehab have a what we call a preliminary year, where potentially they may not get picked up to continue. Everybody else, it's a continuous contract for the entire length of the residency. We do also, though, have a transitional year option, which is just a 1-year residency for folks who either don't match into their specialty of choice, they'll automatically get placed into a TY year, or they just don't know what they want to do, and so they do a TY year and then they reapply once they've kind of decided. After residency, you usually go hone your skills somewhere. We call that a utilization tour. If you're interested, you can come back to fellowship at that point. Technically, you can apply to fellowship right out of residency. Many people do. It's about a 50% selection rate for fellowship. And then after you complete fellowship, usually we'll put folks at a training location where you can use those new skills to teach the next generation. You can see some other details there on the sides. Next slide. Okay, so this just gives you an idea of the competitiveness by specialty when it comes to how many applicants apply each year to a specialty you're interested in. And although we don't offer that many slots because we're just the Army, the number of applicants isn't as much as you would think. So some people are like, oh my gosh, I don't have a chance of getting emergency medicine. And although yes, emergency medicine is competitive, for each of those 32 positions we offer, there's only 1.2 applicants for each of those positions. Those are really pretty good odds. Some specialties have even better odds, as you can see. Neurosurgery, though, is competitive because there's only one spot. So, but still, there were only 4 applicants for that one spot. So again, not that bad of odds, assuming you have the grades and the board scores. So we'll talk about that in a second. Next slide. This just shows you some other specialties. Again, ophthalmology tends to be very competitive, 1.66 applicants. Next slide. So board scores. So I updated these in the spring based on the class of 2020. We'll update it again here after the match for the class of 21. But for example, if you look at the 2018 national mean for USMLE, step 1, step 2, and 2018 is currently the most recent numbers that are published by the USMLE that you can get. So for example, psychiatry in 2018, the mean scores were 220 and 232 on step 1, step 2. Our mean was 223 and 240 from an allopathic standpoint. You can see the range there. And then COMLEX, you can see the scores there. Interestingly, COMLEX does not publish their numbers. So I can't find a 2018 or a 2020 breakdown. They don't publish it, unfortunately. But I can tell you what our students did. Now, where there aren't scores is because there weren't very many applicants. So for example, in neurology, if I put scores in there, it would potentially allow you to maybe figure out whose score that is. I don't want that to happen. So if there's less than 3 applicants or less than 4 applicants, I don't have the scores. But you get an idea of those specialties. Next slide. Here's the next group. You can see the next kind of group of scores there. So I'm very impressed by how you guys do. So for example, look at anesthesiology. You know, someone had a 250 and a 253, well above the national averages, and someone crushed an 810 and a 732 on the COMLEX in anesthesiology. Those are impressive scores. But you can also see, do you have to be a superstar on from a test taking standpoint? Not necessarily. But I will say the more competitive the specialty, if you don't have those scores, it will be less likely that you will successfully match. For example, ophthalmology used to even have minimum scores, but with COVID and everything, we just have kind of steered them away from that. But they used to have a minimum score of like 225, that if you didn't have that minimum, they weren't even going to look at your application. That is not the case this year. Next slide. But wait, there's more. You can see a couple others. I know people's like, what's the neurosurgery and what's the PM&R? I would just say, be above the national averages that you see listed there for USMLE, and you're probably going to be competitive. Next slide. Okay, civilian training opportunities. So we've talked about this a little bit already, but again, foot stomp again, expect to match in one of our military programs. 98% of folks will match into a military residency. We, as I've already mentioned, do have some civilian sponsored positions that we offer in emergency medicine and general surgery. We also require those who are going to the match, who want to do emergency medicine, general surgery, and orthopedics, to go through the ARIS process as well. So they have to put applications in and ideally do some interviews with civilian programs who may not be those civilian sponsored programs. The reason is even though we have these civilian sponsored training places, we still probably need a few more. So for example, at this year's match for emergency medicine, we have 2 spots that we likely will put at least 2 people out into the wilds of the civilian match to go find their own spot, in addition to our 3 programs and the Medical College of Georgia spots that we already have guaranteed. Same thing with general surgery. We've got 3 spots there we're going to put out into the civilian match, most likely, assuming we've got qualified applicants. We don't want to put somebody out into the civilian match who we don't think will match. That doesn't help anybody out. And then orthopedics will have 3 as well. But those are it. There's no one else. So for example, if you're like, I'm anesthesia, I want to do anesthesia, and I want to do it at this civilian place close to my medical school. Nope, sorry. You only have the option to do anesthesia in our programs, at least currently. Maybe some year we'll need a lot of anesthesiologists and we'll allow some people to go into the civilian match. But no, we don't do that. As I put another asterisk, very extenuating family circumstances. If there is a situation, you can put it in your application, whether it's a sick family member or whatever it may be, as to why you need to do a civilian residency. You can put it into your application. Last year, we approved 1 person, and that was someone who was going to get kicked out of the Army due to a medical condition. Likely, we are going to do the same thing this year for someone who's going to get kicked out of the Army because of a medical condition. And we don't want them in a military residency and then get kicked out of the Army. We want them to be in a civilian residency where they can just finish their residency and then just go on with their life. So there are exceptions, but we're talking onesies, twosies at the most. Now, one thing that confuses people, and this may not be a great topic for pre-med students, but typically when you do one of our civilian sponsored sites that we already have listed, the places like UT Houston, Penn State Hershey, OHSU in Oregon, Medical College of Georgia, your active duty obligation is concurrent, meaning you're paying back what you owe the Army while you're doing that training. However, if we put you out into the wilds of the match to go find your own general surgery, emergency medicine, or orthopedics, your active duty service obligation is consecutive. So you're not paying it back at the same time. We do that because you're not making any money for us if you're not at a military treatment facility. And because these other places are guaranteeing us spots, we don't have that need to have you do it consecutively. So that is a little bit of an issue for those handful that are given true civilian. I always say it's not a true deferment, because if you were deferred, we wouldn't pay your salary. But even if you're one of these people that gets a general surgery spot in the civilian side, that's not one of our MilCiv partnerships, we are still paying your salary. And we pay more than most residencies, so it's a pretty good deal. Next slide. Okay, so there is another option that comes up, and that's called a general medical officer, or a GMO. The Army's really gotten away from this. And another kind of myth I want to debunk is that people go out as GMOs right after medical school, and that's not the case. You go out as a GMO after you complete at least 1 year of training. So for those, for example, that either are not selected into their specialty of choice and are placed into a transitional year, or if they elect to do a transitional year residency, usually the TY folks will reapply for whatever residency they wanted or for something different. But if they don't match, then they go out as a general medical officer at the end of that year. You only go out as a GMO if you complete at least 1 year of training, usually a TY year, but at least 1 year of postgraduate medical education. You've passed all 3 of your STEP exams, STEP 1, 2, 3, or COMLEX 1, 2, 3, and you have a valid unrestricted medical license. That's the only way we're going to send anybody out to practice medicine with 4 years of medical school and 1 year of training. That's the only way it's going to happen. Some people love this, though. They get to do all kinds of stuff overseas, all over the world. They do it for at least a year. Sometimes they do it for at least 2 years, and then they come back in and train. And they do their residency at that point. Other folks, they don't come back in. They either can't get back into the residency they wanted, or they just serve their time and get out. Those are all options. But in general, unlike the Navy, the Army doesn't have very many GMOs. So for example, last year we sent 15 people out as GMOs. Next slide. So fellowships. This talk isn't really focused on fellowships, but you saw the slide earlier that showed the map and all the list of them. We have a ton of them. They're actually a great retention tool. They help folks stay in. You get more training for free on the government's dime. I think I saw something in the chat pop up about cardiology. That's a fellowship, and you can do it right after internal medicine residency, or you can go out and practice as an internist for a while and then come back in and do a cardiology fellowship, for example. But it's a great opportunity, and you have a pretty good success rate. We train a lot of people in fellowships. And then after fellowship, we typically put you at a medical center, and then you're teaching residents and students. Next slide. So tips for success. So this first part kind of got complicated. So I altered this a little bit today when I realized I hadn't really updated it. But currently, the Army requires 2 parts of what they call initial military training, or IMT. The direct commission course at Fort Sill and the basic officer leadership course at Fort Sam. Back when dinosaurs roamed the earth and I was HPSP, we only had to do BOLC at Fort Sam, 6 weeks, you're done. Did it after my first year of medical school, had a blast, and it was great. Well, the Army kind of messed this all up for us in 2017, and it took effect in 2018. And as you can imagine, most medical schools don't have 2 summers off anymore. They have at most 1 summer off. So having 2 separate things with 1 summer doesn't work. So what we are seeing, as we predicted, that students are not able to complete both parts. They'll get DCC done, but that's the 1 summer they have off, and they never get another summer off to go to BOLC. Some do, but many don't. And it's creating a crisis for the medical corps. So we have, and I've been fighting this since I took this position last summer, to get this changed. And currently there is a new proposal for the summer of 21, where you would do 3 weeks at Fort Sill, you would be bussed down to Fort Sam to do 3 weeks at Fort Sam. And that would get 6 weeks of face-to-face training with some follow-on asynchronous virtual training, and poof, you're done. That we thought was signed, sealed, and delivered. There's some people who are opposing it. We think it's still going to get approved eventually, but we're planning for it. We've got weekly meetings about it, but I'm not completely holding my breath, but I'm mildly confident that we will get this into effect, which will fix things going forward for those first-year medical students and any of you who might be coming down the pipe in the next couple of years. And then we still are trying to work what we do with the backlog of those folks that got DCC done but haven't done BOLC. That's an issue we're working, and we think we'll have a solution there as well. Okay, so that's a tip for success. If you have time off, it is in your contract that this is mandatory, and that we can terminate you from the program if you don't do it, and that we can take away rotations, which I was getting ready to talk about here in a moment, if you don't do it. So you need to get it done. That's just what I want to foot stomp on. But we have not made it easy for you since 2018, and I am working to get it changed. So assuming you get that done, we still want you to do, ideally between that end of your 3rd year, beginning of your 4th year, your rotations at the sites you want to do residency. Do these, what we call audition rotations, spend a month with these places, interview for residency while you're there. That will really set you up well for the board in the fall of your 4th year. And then regardless, obviously there's 6 general surgery places. We don't expect you to go to all 6 places. So go to the top 2 that you want to go to, but make sure you do interviews at all of them. And this year, all of our interviews are being done virtually. So everyone's on the same footing on that. But if they don't know your name, you're not going to get selected there. That's just the way it goes. And if you have any other questions or issues, contact our office. Next slide. So the Army Combat Fitness Test. So I took my first ACFT last week. Thank goodness I passed. I have been very successful on the Army physical fitness test for many, many years, but this is a whole new animal. I encourage you to Google it. The days of the push-up, sit-up, 2-mile run are gone. This is now more of a CrossFit challenge, and it's challenging. And the nice thing is the Army has decided to phase this in over 2 years. So it doesn't negatively impact your ability to, say, get promoted or get your next job or whatever, but it eventually will, we think. That's the plan. So you need to start practicing now. One thing that does impact you, though, is the Army Body Composition Program, also known as height weight. You need to meet height weight requirements. In order to start your residency, you must be in compliance. Otherwise, we won't let you come into residency. ACFT, though, is not a requirement to be in compliance with, because again, it's right now it's all diagnostic. It's not for record. It doesn't go against you. At some point, it will become an issue. But once you're in residency, you have to at least maintain Army body composition each year. And in the past, you had to meet APFT, but since the APFT is gone and the ACFT is here and it's diagnostic for the first 2 years, for those in residency right now, it's not going to be an issue. But for those medical students, by the time you come into residency, it likely will be required that you pass it every year to progress. Next slide. Okay, when in doubt, contact us. What are things you want to know about? Well, particularly marriage, as they say in The Princess Bride. If you've not seen it, it's a great movie. But anywho, I just saw it the other week because our neighborhood was showing it outside on the big screen. So anyways, marriage is an issue because sometimes students don't realize how important it is to let us know that. If you're not married, you're pen pals in the Army's eyes. I would not advocate that if you're not certain about this particular person, don't marry them for that reason. But at the same time, if you're darn sure you're going to get married, make sure you get married before the match and make sure it shows up in DEERS, which is this system that shows that you're married, and dependents and children, that kind of thing. Otherwise, you're still considered pen pals. Another issue that comes up is if you are married or plan to get married for someone who's transferring to the Army or they're in a different service, that becomes an issue because there's only certain places you can potentially get stationed. All of this is on the application, but I will just foot stomp regarding inter-service transfers that those can take upwards of 2 years. So if you decide at the beginning of your 4th year that you're going to transfer from the Navy to the Army or the Army to the Navy, it is not going to get done by the time the board is done and you're ready to start residency. It just isn't. And it's going to get not approved. So typically we tell folks you've got to start it at least 18 months out. You can see some other issues there. If there's, again, extenuating family circumstances, we want to know about that. We will look at everything. Again, no guarantees. The needs of the Army, unfortunately, take care of everything else. There are some things that the Army absolutely has to follow. And then again, that is the married couples program. So if you're married to another service member, you do get priority. And similar, if you have a family member that has a medical condition and they're in this exceptional family member program, that also gets preference. When in doubt, ask us and put it in your application. Next slide. So how do we manage all this chaos? So you can kind of see my boss is Colonel DeZee. He's dual-hatted as the Army Medical Education Director and the Defense Health Agency GME Director. I am his deputy. We've got 2 civilians who are critical to this process, both for the residencies and fellowships, as well as with PGY1 matching. Next slide. And then the most important people to you while you're in the HPSP program is this team right here. Don runs the program, and then the students are divided alphabetically to these advisors. COVID has been very tough. Most government office buildings still are not open fully, and so this team has been rotating usually 2 or 3 of them in the office at a time, other 2 teleworking. So it has caused some challenges this year to try to keep everything up and going, but we're getting there. Fingers crossed we get a vaccine and everybody can get back to work full time in the next 6 to 12 months. Next slide, I think that's it. Okay, questions. So how do you guys want to do this? Should we look at the chat questions first or take verbals? What do you want to do, Britt?
I haven't been able to see the chat, but I guess we could. Oh, someone said Colonel Morgan. Dang it, I knew it.
Let me, one thing I also want to do is allow students to unmute themselves. That way they can, well, it is that way. So apparently you guys can unmute yourselves.
Yep.
I think that, so if you have a question, go ahead and fire away, and I'll start looking at the chat.
So one said, can you be a dual citizen? Yes, but you have to be at least a US citizen and be willing to denounce your other citizenship. And there's some gray area and small print about the dual citizenship. Minimum age, I know there's a maximum age for HPSP.
I don't know what the minimum is. I think whatever it is to be commissioned, right? Steve,
Yeah.
is that 18? 17 if you give a parent signature or something? You got to be Doogie Howser, I guess, if that's the case.
But there is a maximum age. Is it 34? 45? 34. I want to say 34. But there is a maximum age. But there's a waiver for that too, because there's a waiver for everything.
Yeah, so again, we talked about the international, you have to be a US citizen. And then I don't know what the minimum GRE for vets is. Maybe someone from USAREC knows that. My guess is there's something similar for the DAT and the GRE for some of our other.
So for the vet HPSP, they only offer 3-year scholarships, and it's extremely competitive. I don't know what the minimum is, but I know it's extremely competitive. There's no minimum application criteria for the dental, but again, extremely competitive. So it has to be, they're a pretty high scoring bunch.
I agree. Go Irish. That Clemson game was awesome. Dental school. You want to handle that one, Britt?
Yes, the information is similar, but going through an AMED recruiter for a dental HPSP scholarship is required. There's a new podcast that's called Army Dentistry at Work, where my dental colleague that does exactly what I do talks all about dental, about their residency programs and everything. It's available on iTunes and I think Spotify as well. And the Facebook group, the app is U.S. Army Careers, U.S. Army Medicine Careers. Sorry. And your Facebook group, sir, you're the admin for it.
Yeah, so it's called the Military HPSP Students and Physicians. That's what you want to search for in the Facebook Netherlands. And then there are some questions you have to answer. If you don't answer the questions, I'm not going to approve you. There have been people that are not appropriate who've tried to get into that group. So we do take that seriously. Let's see here.
I have a quick question about ROTC and going into med school.
Sure. We both did it.
So I'm actually a cadet right now. I'm a freshman. So how does it work from going into Army medicine after your ROTC career? Like, I was told that it's probably not advisable to contract right now, and I'm not entirely sure.
Are you going to be, I guess when you contract, there's an active duty and a reserve option. So I guess that's one of the important things. But like Colonel Maurer said, he's part of the educational delay of active duty board, where when you're post CST, you apply for an educational delay of active duty, and a board sits and either approves or denies it. And then you apply to medical school just like everybody, all the other undergrads. One thing that I've learned personally is I waited for my ed delay to get approved before finishing my secondary application. Wrong choice. Don't wait till that gets approved to put in all your applications, because that will maximize your chances of success.
Yeah, it certainly helps. You know, when I sat at the board, I guess it's 2 weeks ago now, I had 34 packets in front of me that were ROTC students that were asking for an educational delay. And I applied pretty much our minimum acceptance criteria. If you met that, I was going to give you an ed delay, because at least, you know, I'd be willing to give you an HPSP scholarship. So therefore, I think you're probably going to get into medical school. Some students obviously had medical school acceptances, but most didn't. And then after the board, you know, I left it open that, you know, because there's a couple of students that had notified the board that they'd taken the MCAT again, for example, to try to improve their score, and their just results weren't back yet, or the results were back, but they weren't in front of the board. And so I got some follow-up emails afterwards where I reviewed, you know, second MCAT attempts that now, you know, were much better. And so then I gave them the approval. So there is a way, but I kind of get your question in some respect, as Britt alluded to, the active duty versus reserve option. That wasn't an option when Britt and I did it.
You're going active duty.
Yeah. But so I don't know what the strategy is there, and probably your professor of military science would be the best one to tell you about that. But nonetheless, you know, to the ed delay processes as I've described. And if you are given an ed delay, you can still apply for HPSB. You can still go to USU, but regardless, whether you go to civilian, HPSB, or USU, you still have to apply to the military match when you finish medical school.
Yeah. Any active duty service obligation, you're required for a military match. So when you're looking at ROTC, there's when I engage with the RUs from Cadet Command, so the recruiting officers, a lot of them are there's a lot of misinformation about what your active duty service obligation is when you combine the HPSP and ROTC scholarship. So an ROTC 4-year scholarship is a four-year active duty and a 4-year IRR. So a total of 8 years of military service obligation. So the HPSP service obligation, it's also one of the questions. The HPSP service obligation is the same. So you get a 4-year active duty and a 4-year IRR. So a total of 8 years of military service obligation. With ROTC and HPSP combined, it doesn't double your service obligation to 16 years. It just whittles away the IRR portion, so that you will have a total of an 8-year of active duty service obligation with 0 IRR. So when the math starts to get a little fuzzy is when you add on to residency. So residency, when he talked about consecutive or concurrent, so the ROTC and HPSP is consecutive, so it kind of stacks on. And residency service obligation is when you're in residency and you're in a military residency, you pay back a year of your initial military service obligation, but you also add on a year at the end. So if you have a longer residency, you kind of keep on stacking. But you're still in your initial MSO for ROTC and HPSP. So say you do a 3-year residency, in that service obligation, you'll add 3 years on the other side. It's really important to understand that during residency, you're paying back one, then you're adding one is when it comes to retention bonuses and money. So at the end of that MSO or that initial military service obligation, you're eligible for a retention bonus as of right now. So there is some little gray area, but I know a lot of when I talk to some of the RUs from Cadet Command last year, a lot of them thought that the service obligation just doubled to 16 years. So it's kind of a weird thing to try to understand if you're not in it all the time. But that's kind of a little bit. So if you think about it, if you want a contract and you want to join the Army and you don't want to pay for school, and you're eligible for the 4-year active duty scholarship, you're going to need to do that same GME payback where you're paying back a year and then gaining one at the end. So your 4-year scholarship, if you're in family medicine, is 7 years in the Army with a ROTC active active duty scholarship with a civilian deferment, and you have the debt if you don't do HPSP.
So is it like a better option than to commission ROTC just to wait for junior year and then apply for HPSP? Is like one probably a better option than the other? Would you say? In your opinion?
It completely depends on your personal situation and your goals. I wanted to be in the Army since I was 5. So when they said you have, you get to do what you're passionate about, medicine, and you add more service obligation, I was like, I'll sign.
Right.
Like, because I knew I wanted to be in the Army, so it didn't matter as long as, because I mean, my only debt being in time was really enticing for me, and I knew that I'd be happy in the Army and passionate about it, and now I'm here.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thanks, Brett. I'm looking at a couple of questions here. So from Emily about pass-fail issues. So certainly while you're on scholarship, if you fail one of the step exams, you must retake and pass it. If you fail it a second time, we will terminate you from the program, whether it's step 1 or step 2. Furthermore, if you are looking to apply to a highly competitive specialty, such as ophthalmology, I am not convinced that any failures will end up matching. That's just the way it goes. Not saying it's not possible. If you failed the first time and then just crushed it the second time, you might still match. But if you don't, I would just say a failure definitely hurts your chances for the most competitive specialties. So a preliminary year, that's just means you've got to do essentially, you're doing a transitional year. It's a 1-year rotating internship through a variety of specialties. Some of them are a little bit more geared towards their particular specialty. So for example, ophthalmology does a little bit more ophthalmology in their prelim year than a traditional TY. But otherwise, at the end of that preliminary year, they have to select you to continue in the program. Otherwise, you'd go out as a GMO at the end of that preliminary year. We've already addressed the cardiology fellowship issues.
And there's a lot
Talked
of
about ADSO. I hear some buzzing from somewhere. If there's a hot mic somewhere out there, if that's Brit or I don't know. We've talked about the payback stuff already.
DCC and Bullock.
Does it complicate time mode? Does it? All right, so I will give you my opinion of the, I don't see the GMO as being an issue from a time payback. You owe the time, you'll pay it back in whatever order you do it in. Yeah, I guess you're delaying that payback a little bit by not going straight through residency. But my only gripe from a GMO standpoint is it's very hard to come back into residency land from GMO land. It's not impossible, but it's harder. And so I usually advocate to students that it is in your best interest to finish medical school and immediately start residency rather than doing a TY and then going GMO, at least not choosing that route deliberately. Get it? That some folks, for example, there's an awful lot of emergency medicine people in the match this year, far more than we have spots. So there's going to be a lot of emergency medicine folks who are going to get put into TY spots because we don't have enough emergency medicine spots for them to go into. Those folks could just do their TY year and go out as GMOs, or if they're smart, in my opinion, they will reapply to emergency medicine. And then they'll kind of lose a year from doing the TY, but then they'll go right into emergency medicine, hopefully. That being said, every year, the general surgery folks, the orthopedic folks, the emergency medicine folks, you name a specialty, they will pick potentially a field applicant who's a GMO over a medical student just because their application is really strong. But I think it's harder to come back in. So those are kind of my pros and cons on that.
And depending with the GMO, a lot of people think it's very operational, or you can do flight surgeon, But you can also do operational medicine after residency, as, you know, as an OBGYN, this is considered an operational. I deployed as a GMO as a fully trained OBGYN. And there's also operationally minded programs within the Army, like the aerospace medicine programs that you don't really have in the civilians sector.
Yeah, and I just think in general, you will be better serving yourself and your patients by being residency trained and board certified in a specialty of whatever ilk, even if you're going to do something that's operational,
Yes.
than if you are just, you know, a GMO with only 1 year of training. It's just simple experience and wisdom and knowledge that you won't necessarily have if you just did that. That being said, I know many folks that have done a GMO and come back in. We've talked a lot about payback already. Okay, 6 weeks total. All right, so this must be talking about the IMT. So I think and I'll watch what I say so I don't get hate mail for it, but whoever, not me, thought that this process of IMT would be wonderful doing it in 2 separate parts as opposed to 1 part, one of their assumptions, which was clearly flawed, was that students would just go to Fort Sill before they start medical school. And that just hasn't worked out. Number one, you guys have to say yes to that, and many of you won't until you're fully in school and under contract. And more importantly, the process of getting through HPSP from the first phone call to a recruiter to you sitting in class in medical school getting paid by the government takes a long time. And so a lot of students just are not fully through all the wickets of the HPSP accession process when the first classes happened at Fort Sill before medical school. So I know of a handful of students that could do any of this before they start medical school. If that's one of you, kudos to you, but don't expect that to happen. It just doesn't work out. So that's why we just need 1 summer, ideally after your first year of medical school, to go do this. I think this new process, if it gets approved, will solve our problems because that's how we've been doing it for decades, and it worked. Anyways.
We have a hand up. Is Ms.
Go ahead, Carolyn.
Kaylin Gruber?
Yes, thank you. Okay, so my question is related to commissioning. So I'm in my last year of ROTC and I received the active duty component, but I also got the educational delay. So how will that impact my medical school career? Will I have to go to military training during my medical school career as well, or no?
Not unless you are HPSP. We don't have any control over you if you're ROTC ed delay and you are out at a civilian medical school, not HPSP. So you would complete your IMT after you finish medical school. So likely you would start residency late. Ideally, if this whole thing that you see us talking about would go through, you would only start residency about 6 weeks plus, give it 2 weeks or so of all the other craziness of getting from A to B. You would maybe be 8 weeks late in starting residency. It's not the end of the world. I've former residency director myself, right? And so I had a number of residents over the years that would come from the field or wherever, and they would be months late potentially. So it's not the end of the world to have the occasional onesie twosie start residency late. But we don't want hundreds of students, which is what we're facing if we don't fix this, where they don't have any of their IMT complete before they start residency. If you're HPSP, then yes, we would make you theoretically complete as much of the IMT as you and your school can get. And with USU, they would obviously all be baked into the curriculum there.
Thank you, sir.
All right, and we have a couple of hands. Was it Ellie Cotty?
Hi, would you mind just talking about ranking and promotion, how that would work for a physician in the Army?
So typically, promotions happen roughly every 6 years for physicians, for the most part. There is a look, what we call below the zone, at 5 years. And most promotions are competitive, with the exception of going from captain to major. What's the term for that, Britt? I call it a non-competitive promotion, but there's a proper name for that.
Almost automatic? No.
Yeah, well, okay, fine. It's pretty much automatic to go from captain to major. So unless you've got bad paper in your file, you've done something bad, you're going to go from captain to major in 6 years. Now, if you're walking on water, you might go from captain to major at 5 years, but that's very unusual.
Yeah.
Going from major to lieutenant colonel, not automatic, but still very, very likely. And again, if you walk on water, that could happen at 5 years. Going from lieutenant colonel to colonel used to be still relatively easy compared to the real Army, where if you're an infantry officer, going from lieutenant colonel to colonel is very challenging. Not quite general officer challenging, but very challenging. Hence why you see a lot of doctors that are colonels. It's not as difficult as it is for line officers in, say, armor, artillery, infantry. But it has become more competitive. There are some things you need to do, certain types of military training that you'll learn more about once you're in the military, schooling such as intermediate leadership education, senior service college, etc. But I would say it happens far more often than it doesn't happen, put it that way. If you don't get promoted to major or lieutenant colonel, there's probably something in your file that's keeping that from happening.
And you went after medical school, you're automatically a captain, no 3. All right.
Right, you're never a first lieutenant. Who
All
was the other
right.
hand there? Emily Monroe?
Yeah, I actually had a question about our training. So I would be graduating in December. So say if I was already accepted into medical school by that point and accepted into HPSC program, would I be able to do that training on that semester off between the spring and summer? Okay.
Please.
Yeah.
Please.
We would definitely want you to do that. You may not be, the problem is when they offer classes and the timing, et cetera, but you'd probably for sure be able to get one of them done. But to some degree, honestly, if we get this new thing set up, I would probably rather you wait until June. And well, I'm sorry, you're talking between undergrad and medical school, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. But yeah, if we could get you into that the lovely 3 weeks at SIL, bus ride, 3 weeks at Fort Sam, that would be the easiest way to knock it out. But I guess you could do one of the spring 3 or 4 week DCCs. I think they're only 4 weeks that happen when they're not HPSP related in the spring, and then try to do one of the 6 week BOLICs. But the part of the problem is the AMED Center and School, or the Medical Center of Excellence rather, they're changing BOLIC. BOLIC is now going to be 10 weeks long. And so another reason why we have to get this fixed for HPSP. So there will be a solution for HPSP, but the rest of the medical corps is going to have to do a longer BOLIC, just like they're looking at a longer captain's career course.
Thank you.
All right.
Yep.
We have a DHA restructuring question, which I don't think we have enough time today.
Yeah.
It's
happening.
It's happening. DHA is running our hospitals, but it is still the Title 10 responsibility of the Surgeon General to recruit and train our Army physicians. So the Army is going to recruit and train our Army physicians.
Yes, I will just say that we are relooking all of the residencies and fellowships, and we are making sure that we are training jointly wherever possible. There could be some consolidation of programs as time goes on, but since my boss, who's the Army director, is the DHA GME director, we are very Army GME focused, and all 3 services are very GME focused. So although I will say our colleagues in the Navy and Air Force have taken a slightly different tack to this, than the Army has. So shameless plug as to why I would go Army HPSP if I were you, because I think your chances of getting the training that you want will remain in the future.
What's the most rewarding part of military medicine for you, sir?
Taking care of patients. That's what still makes me happiest, I think. But honestly, a close second is teaching. That's why I've been in medical education. So for me, getting the opportunity to take care of soldiers and their families and their retirees, but doing that in the setting of a residency program has been the most rewarding for me.
What's the most challenging? This is a question, I promise, not from me.
Well, as you can see, me doing calls while I'm on leave and working all day while I'm on leave. So trying to balance it all, that's something I've just personally struggled with. I'm not saying that's something that everybody's going to have an issue with, but trying to do everything that you want to do, keeping all the balls in the air, that's probably remains the biggest challenge to me.
There's a question about the physical fitness test for women. It is gender neutral. The ACFT is gender neutral. So we have the same scoring, the same stuff as the men. We talked about payback. Our prior service accepted.
I will put in there, Britt, maybe this isn't politically correct, but as the students could easily Google this, there has been concerns that women are scoring lower on this and having trouble passing, in particular, the leg tuck event, to the point where the Army is at least offering that option of doing the plank after attempting a leg tuck and not successfully completing it. So I don't know if that's going to change anything, but there are still, the last statistic I saw from just a couple of weeks ago is 54% of women are still not passing that event.
And more women pass the plank than the men too. But it took me from 0 leg tucks to, it took me about 4 to 5 months of regular work to get leg tucks.
So start practicing. That's all I would say. It's not an impossible test by any means, but it is harder in the sense that some of the events you can't practice in your hotel room, so to speak. And some of them are just physically more challenging than they used to be. And the fact that, as Britt said, that they're gender neutral is tough.
And it takes work and consistency, lots of consistency. Our prior service accepted? Yes. And can you apply to 2 HPSP programs at a time, like our Army and Navy? Yes.
Yep.
What type of person would be good for this program, like character traits?
I think that's very subjective. I think
there's such a wide variety of characters that I've ran into in my career.
I like to see service. I mean, I want to see someone who wants to serve their country. I mean, I will say I see applications, particularly some waiver packets I see, and there's no mention of the military in there at all. It doesn't mean they don't get a waiver, but I certainly like it when they say, I really want to be in the military. This has been something I want to do. I want to serve. I want to be on active duty. I want to take care of, the greatest Americans that we have, which are our service men and women and veterans. Beyond that, I think some of the same traits that got you into medical school will serve you well going forward.
Yeah. And rheumatology is a possible fellowship, and height and weight requirements can be Googled because it depends on what your age, your gender, your height, what your max weight is. But there's also the height and weight isn't the only standard. You can get body fat tape tested too. Talked about veterinarians, pathology.
There is a forensic fellowship option. And again, a difference between the pathology residencies in the military and a civilian pathology residency is that emphasis on forensics. Again, and certainly anyone pathologist on here throw rocks at me, right? Because I kind of hinted at pathologists, they don't have a combat role, but they do. They have a critical role, unfortunately, from a forensic standpoint. of every soldier that comes back that made the ultimate sacrifice. Pathologists are intimately involved with that process. They run the blood banks. The blood is life on the battlefield, and so they have a critical role. So yes, there is a forensic option.
Pros and cons of prior service applying for HPSP.
I think prior service folks maybe have a leg up to some degree, but certainly, again, it's kind of like checking a box on an application. It's kind of free chicken for you if you've got prior service, but I'm not saying that necessarily preferentially helps you, but it's nice to see it on an application.
I find that the expectation management on the other side, you know what is expected with your service.
And I will say that USU has a kind of a selection process that favors prior service to some degree.
Is it true GMOs are less competitive for residencies? You already said not really.
Well, I don't think they're not less competitive. I just think it's harder for them to get back in. So again, I would not recommend opting to do it because I wanted to. I would only go that route if I didn't get in to my residency and still didn't get in after doing a TY year.
I think a lot of it also is when you feel that freedom to go back to residency is going to be difficult.
Well, and I think the other reason I say it is not so much that you can't get back into our programs, but there are some GMOs who just like, I'm just going to pay back my time and get out. And that's, as I alluded to before, there were 4,000 people, counting the 2,000 new graduates, but also the additional 2,000 that hadn't matched the year before or however many years before that. There's over 4,000 folks out there that have doctor behind their name and are not residency trained in the United States. And so you waiting to just jump into that pool to be 4,001, I think is a bad idea. If you can get your residency training done in the military because you're under scholarship or obligation in some way, shape, or form, you should absolutely do it.
What should current HPSP MS1s be doing to prepare for the summer? PT.
Yeah, you guys are smart. You're in medical school. There is nothing that's going to happen at DCC or BOLC, whatever you're going to do, or maybe both, that you can't figure out. I'm not saying that Army 101 is easy, but you're medical students. You have accomplished a lot academically to get to where you are. So there's nothing academically that I think will be an issue for you. But I agree with Britt that, making sure you can do well on the diagnostic ACFT that you will have to take is to your advantage.
Yeah. And colorblind prevent you from being a physician? I do not know. That's within the accessions criterion. I don't know them off the top of my head.
Yeah, I don't know either. I think I'm sure it's waiverable.
Yeah, you can apply to USIS and HPSP at the same time.
Yep.
Because USIS is AMCAS, HPSP is through your AMED recruiter. And
I would do both.
Yeah.
I would.
What's the best chance of matching orthopedics, ortho, HPSP or civilian? I think HPSP.
Yeah, I would. I guess the context of that, I'm assuming this is an ROTC ed delay person or something, because if you're
maybe someone might think that HPSP might decrease their chances of matching ortho. I think since we need orthopedic surgeons.
Ortho is extremely competitive on the civilian side. It is one of the, if not the hardest specialty to get. So it's also one of our hardest specialties. But again, if you saw the numbers, the number of spots we offer versus the number of applicants, statistically, your chances are better with us, but you better want to be in the Army. Don't just join HPSP because you want to be an orthopedic surgeon. Join HPSP because you want to be an Army orthopedic surgeon.
Yeah. Because then that's a longer residency, longer payback, those kinds of things. We don't, other branches, we don't know the scores or the requirements for the other branches. Not on purpose. Similar though, but we don't, it's not like, we don't hate the Air Force or the Navy, but someone asking a question that was answered. Secrets to getting an ed delay or scholarship. Do well. And I think we kind of got in deep.
Yeah, if you
got
meet
into
the
that.
MAC requirements for HPSB, that will help you get an ROTC ed delay. So a 3.2 GPA, a 500 on the MCAT, 124 or greater in each of your scores. That's like 100%. I'm going to approve you for an ed delay. If you're less than that, there better be some other compelling things in your ROTC application as to why we should take that risk. Because my concern is if you've got a 495 on the MCAT, you're not going to get into medical school. So I don't think I should give you an ed delay. We're not going to give you an HPSB scholarship, for example. But if you retake it and now you're meeting those criteria, well, then you'll probably, we'll relook your packet and give you an ed delay.
Okay. Do prior service to Bullock, or just go to Sam Houston. Sam Houston's where Bullock is, and prior service.
So prior service is a sticky thing. So it depends. So for last year, at the last second, we got an exception to policy to the direct commission course, DCC, for a prior service that had basic leadership. What's the C in BLC? Basic leadership course. Thanks.
It's getting late, sir.
BLC or higher. So not just prior service, I went to basic combat training, served my 18 months and got out. That doesn't cut it. You've got to have BLC or greater prior service. You still have to go to Bullock because that doesn't, you got to know the basic officer leadership stuff to be a medical corps officer. So you'll absolutely still have to do Bullock. There's no way around that. Now, other exceptions to DCC are if you're ROTC or USMA grad, because you've already figured out all the DCC stuff if you're ROTC.
All right. It talks about the payback for residency. So again, the residency counts for a payback, but it's a 1-for-1. So you give back a year, but you also owe a year. So it is a neutral. So
yeah, I always say, GME time is neutral from a payback status.
Yes. It's not neutral for the retention bonus, but that's for you to worry about afterwards.
And it does count towards retirement, whereas your time as an HPSP student does not.
Yes.
As Britt and I were talking about earlier.
And so if you owe 4 years for HPSP and you do a 4-year residency like OBGYN, you'll have a total of 8 years in the Army before you're eligible to get out, which is not a bad thing. It's usually 1 to 2 utilization tours afterwards, and you are a usually board certified, well-trained physician, and civilian hospitals love hiring military doctors. Is it a disadvantage to not do ROTC and PI for this scholarship? Yeah, ROTC is not required for HPSB scholarship at all.
Right. The vast majority, again, there was only 30 packets for ROTC ed delay, but we have over, we take roughly 300 to 320 HPSB scholarships every year for the Army, and there's way more applicants than that. So yeah, you don't need to be ROTC to do this, or West Point or whatever. The vast majority of people are folks that want to serve their country, but want some money for medical school. And we are the best solution for you, in my opinion.
Yep. And someone asked why choose Army over the other branches. Our largest, largest training platform. We have more opportunities to be the specialty and subspecialty that you want to be than the other branches. We have more career variability and progression.
Yeah, we by far have the most residencies and fellowships. The Navy is restricting what specialties you can even be, and the Air Force this year alone had a large number of HPSB students that they are not even going to bring on to active duty. And they face a dilemma that's at a general officer level right now that could negatively impact their ability to offer HPSP scholarships to roughly 80 students fewer per year and assess fewer than 80 fewer per year. So that's going to be a major issue that unfortunately to some degree will also impact the Army, where Air Force and Army train together like Shawshank. But yes, let's just say the Air Force and Navy have some issues they're dealing with it's going to impact their GME, whereas the Army is not in that boat.
And as just a medical corps officer, I think that our career progression and is much more advanced than the other services. I found out today that the Air Force does not have a female physician general officer. So that shocked me. So as you know, I'm very happy that I'm in an Army where our medical corps chief, Major General Crossland, and I just have a lot of female mentors that I can look up
General
to.
Krieger.
Yes, General Kruger, who's deployed with my mom. I went to a flight surgeon's course with her back in 2009. So it's a small Army world.
Yeah, we've had the prior Surgeon General was female.
General
and
West,
she
yeah.
also was African American. Our current Surgeon General. We have a very diverse, both from a racial standpoint as well as gender standpoint. So I think that's a good thing that we have that in the Army.
Yes. How far in advance should we start the application? It's the next fiscal year, so they're starting HPSP applications now for the 21 start.
Start talking. The quicker you get the process going, the quicker you start getting the money, because it takes many weeks, months to get through the process.
I said, a point of, do you apply for HPSP before or after the ed delay? Please at the same time, because the application processes for AMCAS opens in June, July. And as you heard Colonel Maurer said, the board for the ed delay just happened now. So if you just start, you're way behind the power curve. And a lot of the medical schools have rolling admissions. So, and are interviewing and those kinds of things. And that was my lesson learned, is not doing the secondary application until after my ed delay was approved. So yeah, I was very behind the power curve.
Regarding the graduate level courses, so yes, those are taken into account. There are a number of packets that we see, probably far more packets that I don't see, where folks have done a post-bac degree and get HPSP scholarship. But I also see a number of waiver packets that come my way, where maybe somebody didn't have great MCAT scores, or maybe their undergraduate GPA wasn't great, but they did a post-bac Masters of Science and they crushed it, and we approved their waiver. So they definitely do count.
All right. Someone asked about the podcast for Army dentists. It's Army Dentistry at Work. It's not doing it. It's making it a background. But Army Dentistry at Work. It's pretty amazing.
Regarding USMLE step scores, you're right. It's going to be pass-fail. I think the program directors are going to have to continue to rely upon the fact that you did pass your school, what your grades are, which a lot of times those are pass-fail. So I think the interview and your rotation, assuming you can do an audition rotation, will play an even greater role. And step 2 will become the new step 1 when it comes to the importance of that score. And until step 2 might become pass-fail someday, who knows? But yeah, step 2 will gain the emphasis that step 1 currently has across the country. It's just the way it goes. This year, though, because of COVID, we basically said you don't even have to have step 2 scores to go before the board. Typically, you have to have a passing step 2 score before you go before the board. This year, you just got to have at least step 1, and you have to pass step 2 before you can start residency.
Right. This HPSP stipend does not have any housing allowance, and they asked during their ADT, do they get housing, the active duty entitlements like housing?
You get per diem while you're on active ADT. You don't get BAH.
Okay. Someone asked if they're a major in the National Guard. Is there a maximum rank for HPSP? No. The What's Your Warrior campaign is showing a HPSP recipient that used to be lieutenant colonel, but you will, during HPSP and at USU, you're kind of bumped down to a second lieutenant while you're in the program.
Right. I was talking to West Point, I think you were on that, right, Brett, about the lieutenant colonel,
Yes.
who then had a distinguished career after West Point in the Army, progressed to lieutenant colonel, then got an HPSP scholarship and got busted back down to second lieutenant while she's in medical school, and then will get reappointed with some constructive credit, likely back to the rank of major, but not lieutenant colonel.
Yep. I had an A-10 pilot. I had, and at USU, I had all kinds of ranks that were back down to second lieutenants with me. Is there TRICARE during HPSP and ADT?
Well, while you're on an ADT, yes, you have TRICARE. You have to call to turn it on, but if you're on active duty, if you're doing a school ADT, then you can go to any location that takes TRICARE and get free medical care. If you're doing an ADT at an MTF, you would just go to the MTF for your medical care and you're covered.
Can you speak of research opportunities, particularly in infectious disease? We have USAMRIID. We have all kinds of the Army Institute of Surgical Research. We have, USAMRIIDs at Fort Detrick, where you have the top bio-level dangerous things in the Army. We have research opportunities where we're coming up with the latest and the greatest in military and care.
And Operation Warp Speed has numerous Army infectious disease physicians working on it. All of the NIH-funded studies from remdesivir, et cetera, had military sites with infectious disease POCs as the site PIs for those studies. There's a number of medical labs, as Britt alluded to, including the one in Thailand, and there's one in Africa. I want to say there's 3 or 4 of them around the world, in addition to USAMRIID.
Yes. What kind of positions are there for operationally minded folk? I think everything from battalion up to division up to TRADOC, also USASOC, Special Forces.
JMAL.
JMAL is our Joint Medical Augmentee Unit. My friend was an OBGYN and was the Civil Affairs surgeon, and now she's the SFAB, the advising brigade surgeon. So, again, NASA astronaut, like how operationally minded is that? I mean, we're everywhere.
Yeah, and wherever there's an Army soldiers, there's Army medicine. And so a lot of those units are downrange or just operationally oriented units. They all have to have medical personnel. So you name it.
Most line units won't do an operation without surgical capabilities within 60 minutes. So you can be as far forward or chilling at the aid station as you want to be. We talked about health insurance. Rheumatology is a fellowship. We talked about the height and weight.
So I guess one thing about health insurance that's not TRICARE. So the military will pay for health insurance if your school requires it. So if your school says, I'm going to Ohio University and I, student Dr. Maurer, have to have health insurance, the Army will pay for, HPSP would pay for the school's plan if they offer a plan, or they will pay for a plan that you purchase, but it's based on zip code as to how much they will pay. So if you're going to just go buy a random health insurance policy and expect the Army to pay for it, you better talk to your HPSP advisor first, because I have had 1 or 2 students that have gone out and purchased a Cadillac healthcare plan, and based on where they were located, they weren't able to get it all paid for, and they were very unhappy when we told them we would not be covering the full amount of their health insurance plan.
Right. How does it work from going from enlisted active duty to HPSP? You would have to, if you're not done with your contract, you'd have to go through your command to get an early release. And the AMED recruiter can work with you for that. How long is the application process for HPSP? Are medical students given priority over pre-medical students? The application process can be a lengthy one. From start to fully commissioned can be anywhere from 180 to 200 days. And there are 3-year scholarships. So if you're already a medical student, you haven't missed the boat, but there are 3-year scholarships.
And we are not doing 2-year scholarships for medical core HPSP. They occasionally will get packets for it. We don't want to approve those. They can't do any of the military training. You don't get the payback out of those students, so we're just not doing them. 3 years is the shortest.
Okay. Would you be accepted if you're underweight?
Get a waiver.
If we've shadowed military doctors and civilian doctors, should we make the distinction on our resumes? Yes. And get a letter of recommendation from that military doctor. That's what I would suggest. What do you think, sir?
I agree.
Okay. How is post-bac graduate GPA factored into HPSP application?
I think I answered this already.
Yeah.
We definitely look at it, particularly if you didn't have the greatest undergraduate grades or the greatest MCAT scores, but you're rocking your post-bac, that will help your application.
How to shadow military doctors, especially with COVID. Usually, if you live near a military treatment facility, you would have to go through the American Red Cross. So you'd have to have, some basics like BLS and HIPAA training, and it's usually the Red Cross person that hooks you in. It is a little bit easier if you know somebody, if you know a physician to shadow that can kind of push from both sides, both you to the Red Cross and that physician to the Red Cross, so they can sponsor you a little bit easier, but doing the Red Cross is how to get into the hospital.
I can also talk on that. I did shadow in the military hospital during COVID, and I contacted the education center, and they helped me do my HIPAA and my military training that I needed to then shadow. So,
what hospital did you do it at?
Fort Stewart, the Wynn Army Hospital.
Wynn, nice.
Cool.
All right. Can you get opportunity to attend special schools or get weapons qualified? The weapons qualification should happen once a year, and depending on your program, plus or minus, but it does happen when you get out. And special schools,
No.
not
I
an
get asked that all the
HPSP.
time. No, why would you want to do it? If you get injured going to airborne school as HPSP, you've just lost your scholarship and you have to pay it back.
Not during HPSP. Afterwards, though.
Afterwards, you absolutely can do it.
Afterwards.
And if you are going to go to the Rangers or whatever, they will sit you through all those schools.
Make sure, because it could be on your VA disability claim if you get hurt. I talked about color blindness, application process speed. Oh, I'm almost getting, or am I getting down to the false end, and it's just going to keep on going and going and going? Oh, Kelly. Okay. What about Master Fitness Trainer course?
I don't see how or where you do it during HPSP, but maybe there'd be a way you could. But in general, when you do your ADTs, I want those ADTs done either at DCC or Bullock or at an MTF as an audition rotation. That's all I'm going to approve. If you have some other way of getting it done on the side because you know a master fitness trainer or something wants to give you the training and you're close to them, fine. But you can get it done afterwards. I definitely have known physicians that have gotten that qualification after they've done their GME and et cetera.
Yeah, I went to flight surgeon school while I was in medical school, but I paid for it myself, even though I was at USU. I went on my own time, permissive TDY, paid for it myself. So people with neurologic and circulatory disorders eligible, it depends on what, and so I cannot dig in there. And, oh, they wanted to talk about aerospace medicine. So aerospace medicine is a 3-year residency program that is done after a transitional year. It is a combination of preventative medicine, occupational health, as well as you get an NPH while you're there. It's very operationally minded within the aviation community. Do lots of cool stuff, flying in helicopters, but also you are the subject matter expert of all preventive stuff and all occupational stuff when you're looking at kind of the physiology of the body in flight and in crashes and those kinds of things. It's I went to the flight surgeon course, and that was a really cool 6-week course, and it is I think it's cool. And be an astronaut. All right, 6-week training course requirement for dental students.
I have no idea.
I don't know. I don't think I think it's just going to be MedCore for right now. It's the DCC and BOLIC is required, but I don't think the 6-week shortened course is is it going
I
to
see
be
what you're saying. Yeah, no, we're just doing it for
MedCore?
for medical core.
For
Mostly
physicians.
because the dental core and the vet core and the other HPSP non-medical core folks don't have these long GME programs that prevent them from getting this done.
Okay, sir.
Nor are they nearly as big as us to where they have hundreds of people that are now behind the power curve that we do.
All
Are
right.
we done?
I think.
Oh, hey, it's the end. There's probably no one left on the call. Okay. Well, thank you all very much for your attention and all the great questions.
Right. Thank you. Thank you so much, sir. It was a pleasure to be on this call with you.
Well, great working with you again, Britt.
All right, sir. I'll talk to you later.
All right. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you both so
You're
much.
welcome. Bye.